I want to take the opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker for the evening because we have a real unique opportunity to hear from a national leader who is also dealing with issues that are absolutely fundamental to the future well-being of our nation and our families, not only this generation, but future generations. He himself is no stranger to the culture war that is raging around us. Ryan Anderson serves as the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation in Washington, D.C., and is the founder and editor of Public Discourse, the online journal of the Witherspoon Institute of Princeton, New Jersey. He's the author of several books, including When Harry Became Sally, Responding to the Transgender Moment, and Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. He's also the co-author of What is Marriage, Man and Woman, a Defense, and Debating Religious Liberty and Discrimination. Ryan received his Bachelor of Arts degree from Princeton University, graduating Phi Beta Kappa and magna cum laude, and he received his doctoral degree in political philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. He's made appearances on ABC, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, all those other acronyms for these news programs, and Fox News. And his work has been published by the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Oxford Press, Cambridge University Press, the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy, and on and on and on. Ryan's research has also been cited by two U.S. Supreme Court justices, Justice Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas, in two separate Supreme Court cases. Don't know there are many folks in the room that can claim that. As you'll see firsthand, Ryan is one of our nation's foremost thinkers and communicators about the most pressing cultural issues that are facing our country today. Please help me welcome my good friend Ryan Anderson.
Thank you. That was an overly kind introduction, and so I have to immediately humble myself by pointing out that both of those Supreme Court opinions were dissents. We lost those cases. So as nice as it was to have been cited, I would have rather won the cases and not have been cited. What I want to do tonight, what John had asked me to do, was just speak about some of the most important issues for social conservatives, for religious conservatives, for people who care about faith, family, and freedom that are facing our nation, facing the state today and for the foreseeable future. And so to a certain extent, this will be somewhat of a depressing talk, especially for an after-dinner speech, just because there are so many pressing issues that are facing our nation on a whole host of topics. So I'm going to kind of march through this. And what I want to do is just think from the perspective of the child. I think when we say that we're for family values and we say that we care about traditional values, what we really say is that we want to sacrifice adult desires, adult interests for the sake of our children. I mean, it's what most of us as responsible parents do. You know, we come second, our kids come first. And the same thing should be true when it comes to public policy, when it comes to law, when it comes to government. We should be making sacrifices for the sake of the next generation, for the sake of our children and our grandchildren. And so I just want to kind of walk through something that would look like the early life cycle of the child. And just start by simply recognizing that that child has a right to life. This will be the shortest part of the talk because I think on this issue, we're now at a place where I would doubt that anyone in this room feels uncomfortable having a conversation with a friend, a colleague, a family member, explaining why you're pro-life. One of the great things that I've inherited from the work that social conservatives have done for the past 50 years is that I know all of the arguments on the life issue. Right? There were trailblazing pioneers in the months after Roe v. Wade who set up all of the pro-life organizations in this country, set up the March for Life, set up in every state a pro-life organization lobbying their state house to, one, overturn Roe v. Wade, and then two, pass laws to protect the unborn. But sometimes we can therefore take it for granted that in the past 45 years, there have been over 1 million babies that have been lost to abortion. And that's a reality I think we should kind of be sober about. Even as we're making gains, more pro-life laws have been passed in the past 10 years than in the previous 35 years combined. Right? Pro-lifers are at the vanguard in the state houses. More restrictive laws are being passed. The abortion rate is at the lowest that it's been at any point since Roe v. Wade. We're making real progress, and we should acknowledge that. There's still a far way to go. There's still 1 million babies every year being aborted. So I should clarify, when I said 1 million babies, that's a year, not just since Roe. I think it's now 47, 48, 49 million total since Roe. It's just an astronomical, unthinkable topic. For as long as I can remember, I've been pro-life. My parents did a great job raising me and my 4 brothers, and this was something that was obvious. Of course, that's a child in the womb. What else is it? Right? It's not an alligator. It's not a rock. Like, what is that thing kicking in the womb if it's not a person? But for me, this kind of hit home in a deeply personal way. Just about 1.5 years ago, my wife, came in with a little stick, and it had a little plus sign on it, and we were expecting our first child. And then, what was it? I guess 13 weeks after that, we go in for the ultrasound, and then 23 weeks or 27 weeks, I'll do the math, a beautiful little boy is born, right? And this weekend, he'll turn 14 months, and it just kind of drives home what a great gift every life is. Even if theoretically you've always kind of known the right answer to the question about abortion, you've known the right answer to questions about stem cell research, embryonic destruction, things like that, to actually hold your son for the first time and just recognize this is entirely a gift, right? This is utterly gratuitous. Each and every one of us made in the image and likeness of God. Each and every one of us a special act of creation, a special act of love from God. And to see how callous our country is with respect to so many of these gifts. So the first thing to say from the child's perspective is that child has a right to life. Right? The very life of that child is a gift to all of us. And so it's important that someone like John is at the State House advocating for those lives, right? Speaking up for people who can't speak for themselves. Big business isn't going to do it. Hollywood's not going to do it. The Academy's not going to do it. It's going to be you. It's going to be the North Carolina Family Policy Council. It's going to be John Russin. It's going to be people like us. So then the second step is, what else does that child deserve? Not just a right to life, but that child has a right to a mother and a father. And if you think about what we owe to children, we owe them a relationship with the man and the woman who helped give them life. That whenever possible, children should be raised by their mother and their father. Right? This is why when my wife and I checked out of the hospital 14 months ago, we didn't just want to go home with a baby, we wanted to go home with our baby. Right? It's understandable why you as the parents want to make sure that, when the bracelet got on my wrist, I marked the baby with a permanent marker to make sure we got our baby. I was a little paranoid, but you hear these horror stories of babies getting swapped at hospitals. The parents care, and so it's entirely understandable why the children might care. Right? Put yourself in the child's perspective. They want to be raised not just by any old parents, any old generic adults. They want their mom and their dad. It makes a difference to them. One of the saddest things that I've ever seen was a report from the Institute for American Values titled, "My Daddy's Name is Donor." Right? All of these children who have been conceived by anonymous sperm donations who report these longings, these feelings that there's an absence. They don't know half of their identity. And what did our Supreme Court do 5 years ago? They utterly redefined the nature of family, the nature of marriage. Right? They said, it's any two consenting adults. It doesn't matter if it's a man and a woman, a mom and a dad, a husband and a wife. And if you think that, you're somehow bigoted. You're somehow engaged in discrimination. You're somehow kind of backwards in your thinking. What they did was they overturned not just several thousand years of human practice, not just the testimony of Scripture, but they overturned the law written on the heart. Right? This is one of those truths that's built into the human condition, one of those truths that St. Paul talks about as the law written on the heart. right? An anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary. We're not interchangeable. Right? A biological fact that reproduction requires both a man and a woman. A social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. What the court did several years ago was just ignore all of that. The court says, no, any two consenting adults, it's all the same thing. Now, this most recent redefinition of marriage is the consequence, not the cause, of the breakdown of the family. Right? The family started breaking down about 50 years ago when Daniel Patrick Moynihan wrote his famous Moynihan Report. Right? He was pointing out that marriage was starting to fall apart in the country. Back in 1964, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, at the time he was the Secretary of Labor. He was a liberal professor from Harvard University. He was a Democrat senator from the state of New York. And he was accused of being a racist at the time when he wrote his report because he pointed out that births to single mothers in the African American community were approaching 25%. And he said, this is going to be a crisis. If a quarter of all of the children within a certain community are born outside of marriage and they don't have fathers in their lives, we're going to see a whole host of negative consequences. Moynihan was accused of being a racist because they didn't like the messenger, right? So they were shooting the messenger. But the reason he wrote that report was precisely because he wasn't a racist. He cared about those kids. And so in 1964, births to single mothers in the general population were about 5%. And in the black community, they were 25%. Fast forward to today, in the general population, 40% of all Americans are born to single mothers. It's 50% of Hispanic babies, and it's 72% of African American babies. These children have done nothing wrong in life, right? But they are being set up on a road with all sorts of elevated risks, elevated challenges. They don't have a fair shot at life. And this is why it's so important that we have a family policy group, right? Big business wants to lower their taxes. They want free trade. They care. They're looking out for their interests. Hollywood's looking out for their interests. Who's looking out for these children's interests? Right? Who's trying to craft public policy in a way that's going to benefit these children? Who's going to try to strengthen marriage? Whether that's strengthening marriage in the tax code, strengthening marriage by returning the law on marriage to reflect the truth about marriage, right? You need someone engaged in that task. Now, another thing to say on this marriage topic is that when I point out that right now 40% of all American kids are born outside of marriage, gays and lesbians aren't to blame for that, right? Gay marriage didn't create the problems that we see in our marriage culture today. The sexual revolution did. Think about what happened in the 60s. When Moynihan's writing his report, what's going on with the sexual revolution? We get the introduction of the hookup culture. We get the introduction and normalization of premarital sex. We then have the introduction of no-fault divorce laws. We see the rise of cohabitation, the rise of non-marital childbearing, the more than doubling in the rates of divorce. All of that takes place for 2 generations among straight people. And then the Supreme Court says, wait, if all of you straight people aren't taking permanency or monogamy or exclusivity very seriously, why should we take sexual complementarity very seriously? That the legal redefinition of marriage is a consequence of the breakdown of marriage, but now it's serving as a catalyst. And so what we've seen in the past several years, after the court said man and woman is interchangeable for marriage law, all of a sudden you see people embracing the idea that this should lead to polyamory. So they've created a new word. The word is throuple, for a 3-person couple. So take the word couple, chop off the C, and add a THR. And so if you're the same-sex couple and you go to the Supreme Court and you say, Anthony Kennedy, I have a constitutional right to marry the person I love, why can't you and 2 other people go to the Supreme Court and say, I have a constitutional right to marry the people I love? If 2 men can be married, why can't 3? Or a foursome, 2 men and 2 women, right? Sexual orientation has no bearing on this. The way that we arrived at monogamy was that it's 1 man and 1 woman who can unite as one flesh in the action that can create new life. And then every new life has one mother and one father. So what happens when the court throws this out? What happens when the court says all of human history, all of human experience is now contrary to our enlightened notions of justice? Someone's going to have to be standing in that gap, defending even the principle of monogamy, defending the principle of permanency, defending the principle of sexual exclusivity. Because the logic of the sexual revolution is that consenting adults should do whatever consenting adults want to do, right? That the only value in the realm of sexuality is consent, right? It entirely ignores the needs or the rights of children, right? It focuses entirely on adult desire, right? It undermines, it turns upside down the way in which society should be structured, in which adults restrain their desires for the sake of their children. So yes, children have a right to life. They then also have a right to a relationship with both their mother and their father. And the way that society throughout all of human history had tried to secure this right was by an institution that united that man to that woman, and then the two of them united to each other being united to that child. And you can see this, think of every delivery you know of. Whenever a child is born, a mother is close by. She's normally in the same room, right? That's simply a fact of biology. That's a fact of nature. When the baby's born, the mom is right there. The question for culture, and therefore the question for law, will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? And right now, what we're seeing is that 40% of all Americans, a father's not close by. For many Americans, the father's not around for long. Somewhere between roughly around 40% of all marriages end in divorce. The numbers are higher for second marriages and third marriages. So some of those divorce numbers are repeat divorcees. But we're not seeing what we would hope to see, is that men and women commit to each other permanently and exclusively, every child being born inside of marriage with a relationship with their mom and dad sticking together for the long haul. There's a lot of work to be done on marriage and the family. All right, so what would come next in this kind of concentric circle? We owe our children a life, the right to life, to protect their life, to welcome them into life. We owe our children a relationship with their mother and with their father. The next is that we owe our children an upbringing that reflects the truth about God. One of those next things that we would owe is to give our children a sound religious formation, to teach them truths about the Creator, about the Redeemer, about the Sanctifier, teaching our children truths about the most important things in life. And this is why the very first clause of the First Amendment to the Constitution deals with religious liberty. And yet what we're seeing in a host of areas is that the ability of families to form their kids in the faith and then to live out those faith commitments is being threatened. So let me just give you one example right off the bat is during oral arguments in Obergefell, so the Supreme Court case that redefined marriage, Justice Alito asked the Solicitor General during the Obama administration, what's going to happen to Christian schools that continue to teach that marriage unites husband and wife? Will they lose their nonprofit tax status? The way that racist schools lost their nonprofit tax status. He mentioned the case Bob Jones University, a famous Supreme Court case in which a school, an evangelical school at the time that had a policy on no interracial dating, the IRS revoked their nonprofit tax status. And so Alito says, all right, if this Supreme Court redefines marriage, will the Obama IRS now revoke the nonprofit tax status of Wheaton College, of the University of Notre Dame, of Gordon College, of Regent, of Liberty? Just fill in the blank for your Christian school, and not just colleges, but K through 12. Maybe you send your kids to a private Christian day school. Maybe you send your kids to a private Christian high school. Will all of those schools now be on the wrong side of the government? And what the Solicitor General said was chilling. He says, I don't deny it, Justice Alito, that's going to be an issue. I don't deny it, it's going to be an issue. He could have said, of course not, Justice Alito. Racism is utterly different than Orthodox Christian beliefs about human sexuality. And so the Obama administration will never treat people who believe marriage unites man and woman the way that we treat racists. Right? He could have said that. He could have tried to have a little distance between the bad outcome that he knew Alito didn't want to see him endorse. And instead he said, look, that's going to be an issue. Had Hillary Clinton won the last presidential election, it would be an issue right now. There's no doubt in my mind, just given what the Obama administration was doing in its last months of office, that they were paving a way to pass the baton to the Clinton administration. Everyone assumed she was going to be winning the election. They were all shocked when they woke up that next morning and Trump had won. And Trump has been his administration has been remarkably good on religious liberty. They've been undoing step by step by step all of the religious liberty violations that took place in the prior administration. If you think about this, religious liberty wouldn't even have been a main topic for a dinner discussion like this prior to the Obama administration. Can you think of any high-profile religious liberty violations during the George W. Bush administration? Or even for that matter, during the Bill Clinton administration. President Bill Clinton was the one who signed the Religious Freedom Restoration Act into law. And then when Indiana passed the same exact bill and Governor Pence signed it into law, the state gets boycotted. Just like your state got boycotted after HB 2. Right? The left all of a sudden has decided that policies that 10, 15, 20 years ago were common sense, bipartisan, unanimous policies, all of a sudden now you're a human rights violator. The NBA will boycott your state, even while doing business in China. And the hypocrisy here, the double standards here are appalling. So one question will be, will you be able to educate your children in the faith? Will faith-based schools that teach the truth about marriage, that teach the truth about issues where the government has strayed from the truth, will they lose their nonprofit tax status? Will they lose their accreditation? What's good of going to a non-accredited college? Or put it this way, if you're under the age of 16, you have to go to an accredited school, either a state-run, government-run public school or a private school or a homeschooling program that has met the state's standards for education. What then happens after you graduate and certain professions are closed to you? What if you can't become a doctor unless you're willing to perform abortion? Or you're willing to counsel same-sex couples that are having marital trouble? Or you're willing to turn men into women and women into men? We'll get to that a little bit later. But the religious liberty challenges facing the country, there's been a pause button that has been pressed during the past 2.5 years. The Trump administration, it's not a stop button, it's not a rewind button, it's a pause button. And as soon as there's a hostile administration back in D.C., you can expect all of these religious liberty cases to come back with a vengeance. Whether that deals with Little Sisters of the Poor, the fact that they had to spend 8 years of their lives suing the federal government, the fact that the owners of Hobby Lobby had to sue the federal government, the fact that Wheaton College had to sue the federal government. Don't think that any of these cases are settled and done with forever. The Trump administration is settling these cases, but the next administration will have another hostile regulation, whether it comes from the Department of Health and Human Services or the Department of Education or the Department of Justice. And so we're going to need people. We're going to need lawyers. We're going to need policymakers. We're going to need lobbyists, activists pushing back on this. And it can come at both the federal level or the state level. So most of you are probably familiar with Jack Phillips, the baker. He was sued under a state law, right? A bad state law that said that he had to make custom wedding cakes for same-sex weddings. He was then tried under the state Human Rights Commission that was packed with a bunch of political appointees from a left-leaning administration. And during his own administrative hearings, they compared him to Nazis and to racists. They ridiculed his faith. That's why he won at the Supreme Court. He won 7-2 because the treatment that he had received under a state tribunal had been so biased that he even got 2 of the lefties to vote for him. Right? This wasn't a 5-4 win at the Supreme Court. It was a 7-2. That could happen here. Right? This is what's at stake when you see North Carolina contemplating to pass a sexual orientation and gender identity law. Some of your cities have these laws, but statewide you don't, and you don't want to. What these laws do is they take sexual orientation and gender identity, they make it a protected class the way that race is a protected class. So just think of all of the ways in which it's illegal to run a racist business, as it should be. It's illegal to run a racist school, as it should be. It's illegal to be a racist lawyer, as it should be. And now plug in sexual orientation and gender identity so that if you believe we're created male and female and that male and female are created for each other, you're now homophobic or transphobic. You're going to be treated in law the same way as the racist. Right? That's what's at stake. That's what Jack Phillips was facing. So what we owe to the children is a way in which they can be formed in their faith and then live out their faith without government penalties. Right? I want my son to grow up to love God and to live out his faith every day of the week, 24 hours a day. Right? I don't want him to be the type of Christian that just goes to church on Sunday mornings for 1 hour and says, all right, I checked the box for this week. Right? None of us want that for our own lives or for our children's lives. We want them to be able to live out their faith at work, in their families, in their communities, in their charitable activities. And what happens when the government says no? The Green family, you can't live out your faith at work. The Greens are the owners of Hobby Lobby. Jack Phillips, you can't live out your faith at work. Little Sisters of the Poor, you can't even live out your faith in your own charity. Right? These people run nursing homes for the elderly as they approach death, and they were told, no, you have to pay for abortion and contraception. They're Roman Catholic nuns. Why do they need a contraception and abortion in their health care plans? Right? This was utterly to make a point. Right? The Obama administration was trying to prove a point about these sexual issues, that if you disagreed with them on these sexual issues, you were part of a basket of deplorables. You remember that phrase. I didn't create the phrase. There are many people who think that way about people like us. And it's a sad political reality, but that's going to be coming back in this coming election. Okay, last thing I want to say, and this is a kind of a new topic. The last time I spoke for John at one of these, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I don't remember saying a word about this. And that's the new question of gender identity. I'm not even sure the phrase gender identity was on any of our radar screens 4 years ago. It wasn't until Bruce Jenner, as he was then known, went on 2020 for that 2-hour special and announced that he was becoming Caitlyn Jenner, that this really became kind of like a prime time topic. In fact, I think that was the first prime time interview devoted to transgender issues. And now today, at the Supreme Court, a very important case involving Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, asking if the word sex in the Civil Rights Act means gender identity and transgender status. Right? There's a chance that you would have unelected judges just rewriting the law. Thankfully, with Kennedy retired and with Kavanaugh on the court, it seems much less likely that that would happen with the current Supreme Court justices than what might have happened 2 years ago. Both of Trump's picks, Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, have been outstanding, just from a purely jurisprudential perspective. But what's at stake here is that what we saw was that the LGBT activists, they knew they were going to win in Obergefell. They knew that they had Anthony Kennedy's vote, and so they pivoted from the LGB part of the acronym to the T part of the acronym. Right? For the past 20 years, we had a discussion about gay marriage. We've had debates about gay marriage. We knew what the LG and the B part of the acronym meant, and we never really had a discussion about the T part of the acronym. And then overnight, Bruce Jenner goes on national TV, and then the Obama administration issues a Dear Colleague letter telling every school in the country that they have to do their bathrooms based on gender identity. They have to do dorm rooms based on gender identity. They have to do sports teams based on gender identity. Overnight, Loretta Lynch is suing your state because of HB 2. Recall that the Obama administration sued the state of North Carolina because you said, no, we're going to keep it as biology, not subjective identity. That objective biology is how we're going to govern our public facilities, not someone's subjective identity. But this is when I first kind of started digging into the question, what does the gender identity part, the transgender part of the acronym, really mean? And this is when I was first really troubled because I first encountered people who had transitioned and then detransitioned. And so I ended up writing a book about this topic, partly because after having done a book on the gay marriage debate and having done a book on the religious liberty debate, there was nothing left to lose. It's a very liberating feeling. Janis Joplin, when she says freedom is just another word for nothing left to lose, there's actually a lot of truth in that statement. And so from my perspective, I was like, anyone who hates me, they can't hate me anymore. And the people who hate me already, this new book won't give them any more additional reasons to hate me. And the people who don't already hate me, this new book isn't going to flip them on me. And so what I discovered is that the way that they're now treating children, so staying for a minute with the children focus, is a child as young as 2 or 3 years old, if they're consistent, persistent, and insistent they're the opposite sex, should be treated as the opposite sex, given a new name, a new pronoun, a new wardrobe, have access to new bathrooms at school, play on the new sports team. And if you doubt that this is happening at those young ages, do Google searches for Washington Post and LA Times and 5-year-old transgender child or 3-year-old transgender child. You'll see these newspaper reports kind of the parents being proud of the fact that they have the youngest transgender child, which makes you question who's really driving this decision-making process. So the first step is what they call social transition. You socially treat your child as the opposite sex. The second step is puberty blockade. You block your child from going through puberty in the, quote, wrong body. And so children at age 8, 9, and 10 are being prescribed an off-label drug. So it's not FDA approved for this purpose, but they're being prescribed a powerful drug that will block their pubertal development so that the boy will not develop into a man, so that the girl will not develop into a woman. Because they don't want, this is the gender experts say, we don't want the child to develop into the wrong body. So they block their puberty. This then leads to the third step, which is cross-sex hormones. Because now you have a teenager who's trapped in a child's body. You have a 14, 15, 16-year-old who is still in an adolescent's body when all his or her classmates went through puberty, hit their growth spurts, developed into a man or developed into a woman. This high school student is still kind of trapped in a young person's body. So what they do for the high school girl is they administer her testosterone. What they do for the high school boy, they administer him estrogen to try to masculinize her body, to try to feminize his body. That then leads to the fourth and the final stage of this treatment protocol. It's a 4-stage treatment protocol, which is surgical transition. And so the official recommendations are at age 18. Increasingly, this is being done at age 16. This would be surgery to remove certain body parts and then use plastic surgery to create body parts that resemble the opposite sexes. It could entail top and or bottom surgery. Top surgery being the removal of breasts or the creation of breasts, and then bottom surgery, the removal of external genitalia and internal reproductive organs. Sadly, or disturbingly, both sad and disturbing, part of a Freedom of Information Act request, a FOIA request, revealed that your tax dollars have funded an NIH study where double mastectomies were performed on 2 13-year-old girls as part of their treatment for gender dysphoria. So a government-funded study, it was these aren't even high school age girls yet. At 13, they're still in probably 7th or 8th grade. And as part of their treatment for gender dysphoria is that they had double mastectomies performed on them. The saddest part of the research that I did for the book were the stories that people have told about regretting these decisions. And you can read, it's the 3rd chapter of the book where I go through many of these, but you can find them on YouTube. These are videos that people have made. And the particularly troubling parts were young women who decided to transition in high school. High school is a difficult stage of development for anyone. High school is particularly hard for girls. High school is particularly hard for girls in today's culture, right? In a Me Too culture, in a very kind of sexualized culture. There are a variety of reasons why girls might feel uncomfortable in their own bodies. But the problem isn't with their bodies, right? That's where they're being fed a lie. And so these are girls who at age 16, 17, 18 went on testosterone. Some of them had the mastectomies performed, and then 5, 6, 7 years later regretted it, detransitioned. And they tell the story of, I'll never get my voice back. Right? After taking testosterone for 5 years, my vocal cords have changed, and it doesn't unchange, so you never get your original voice back. They talk about scarred chests. After having a double mastectomy, your breasts don't grow back if you go off the testosterone. These are lives that have been severely damaged, bodies that have been damaged, psyches that have been damaged. And sadly, parents have lost custody because they said no to this. In Ohio, right? I thought this would happen in California, New York, Massachusetts. It happened in Ohio. Catholic parents lost custody of their 17-year-old daughter because they said, we want her to see a therapist and to undergo talk therapy about why she feels uncomfortable being a girl rather than receiving testosterone therapy. And the hospital said, no, testosterone therapy is the right way to go, and the judge sided with the hospital instead of the parents. This is why you need something like the North Carolina Family Policy Council to make sure that that doesn't happen here, that parental rights are respected and protected, especially parental rights with respect to medical care. Dr. Paul McHugh is someone who has helped me a lot with this research. He was the director of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Hospital, one of the world's leading hospitals in Baltimore, which is where I grew up, which is how I first got to know of him. And in 1979, he shut down the sex reassignment clinic at Johns Hopkins because he said it was fundamentally participating with psychosocial struggles, not physical struggles. He said the problem with someone who has gender dysphoria, gender identity conflict, isn't with their body, it's with their mind and their emotions. And so the proper medical response is directed at the mind and the emotions, not at the body. The analogy that he draws is to anorexia. He says no physician worth his or her salt would prescribe liposuction to an anorexic high school girl because the problem's not with her body. What you would do is you would try to figure out what's causing the anorexia. Is it a body image problem? Is it an eating disorder? Those can have separate etiologies, separate underlying causes for why you struggle with your diet, why you struggle with your body image. You try to figure out for this particular child, why do you have this body image problem? Why do you have this eating disorder? What's your underlying cause for your anorexia? He says, do the same thing for the high school girl who doesn't feel comfortable as a girl. Figure out what's causing that discomfort. Is it something that she's experienced? Maybe she's been sexually assaulted. Is it something that's going on at the school environment? Maybe the school has a lot of kind of like a toxic masculine environment in which she wants to become a man precisely to escape some of the male pressure on her. This is frequently reported by high school girls who have transitioned. They said, I wanted to become the type of person who hurt me so that that person could never hurt me again. Right? You can see that there's going to be a variety of reasons why someone might feel uncomfortable in their own body. He says, figure out what's going on and then address that. Give children a chance to grow through this. This is particularly true for younger kids. When I mentioned that they're doing social transition for 2, 3, 4, 5-year-olds, the best research here shows that 80 to 95% of pre-pubertal children will naturally grow out of a gender identity conflict if you just give them the time and the space. If you let them explore, you let them go through a phase in life, they'll naturally reconcile their identity with their body. By contrast, if you block their puberty, if you give them cross-sex hormones, it seems that you're locking in the transgender identity. That it may very well be going through male puberty that helps that boy who doesn't quite feel comfortable being a boy feel comfortable being a man. That the rush of testosterone that he receives at puberty, hitting his growth spurt, becoming taller, becoming more muscular, his voice deepening, all of those changes, developmental changes, may be the very thing that helps him feel comfortable in his own body. And remarkably, in now I think it's 17 states, Dr. McHugh would lose his medical license if he practiced medicine with a minor the way that he thinks it ought to be practiced. 17 states, not North Carolina, if I have my facts straight here, have banned what they call conversion therapy. And they say, look, if the gender identity of this 10-year-old boy is really girl, he identifies as a girl, and you try to convert his gender identity to being a boy, that's unlawful. And if a medical professional engages in that type of therapy, the medical professional could lose his or her medical license. And yet in all 50 states, it's perfectly legal for a medical professional to give that boy puberty-blocking drugs and then estrogen, which is actual conversion, right? That's where you're actually converting the body of that boy, feminizing the body. But if you try to help the boy feel comfortable being a boy, in 17 states, you could lose your license. That's another issue that you're going to have to watch for here. Hopefully no time in the near future. But California has passed laws like this. New York has passed laws like this. We've already seen the custody dispute happen in Ohio. It's not going to be the type of thing that you can hide from. Eventually, it's going to confront you, and you have to confront it. So let me wrap up with two thoughts. I'm Catholic, and so I'm obliged to at some point quote a pope in any sort of public address. Philosophy professor in Krakow, Poland, and then he was the bishop of Krakow, Poland. He said that the 20th century, the crisis of the 20th century was a crisis of faulty humanism, faulty anthropology, secular humanism. That what we thought we were doing in the 20th century was that by abolishing God, we'd be elevating man. And that's where all these atheistic regimes, that's what they thought they were doing. If we get rid of God, we're actually ennobling man. But the exact opposite happened. By getting rid of God, we degraded man. And when you look at the 20th century, you look at the two world wars, you look at the Holocaust, you look at the killing fields, you look at the totalitarian regimes, you look at communism, socialism, et cetera, what you see here is a consistent degrading of man, degrading of the man, of the creature made in the image and likeness of God. That if you get rid of God, you're actually doing damage to his image. And so John Paul analyzed this back when he was a philosophy professor in terms of what was going on in the middle of the 20th century, the two world wars, the Holocaust, the totalitarian regimes. He then extended that as Pope to the abortion scourge. He said, here what we're doing with abortion is we're neglecting to respect that image of God in the womb. And if he were with us today, he would extend that same analysis to the sexual revolution, the redefinition of marriage, and now transgender ideology. That what's at stake here are three truths right in the very first couple of pages of the book of Genesis. That we're made in the image and likeness of God, that we're created male and female, and that male and female are created for each other. Everything I've more or less said tonight has been about our culture rejecting those three truths. Right? Foundational anthropological truths made in the image and likeness of God. That explains all of the abortion, embryo-destructive research, euthanasia, assisted suicide, rejecting that each and every one of us made in the image and likeness of God. Created male and female. Everything that we're seeing with the transgender question, gender identity disputes. Male and female created for each other. The two become one flesh. Everything we're seeing with the gay marriage debate, and then all of the religious liberty disputes that touch on all three of those questions, right? Hobby Lobby has to pay for abortion. Jack Phillips has to bake the same-sex wedding cake. 2 Catholic hospitals are currently being sued because they won't do sex reassignment surgeries, right? On all three of those issues, if you try to stand for biblical truth and the government disagrees, that's where you hit the religious liberty issues. So that's the insight from John Paul, is that what we're seeing here are two competing accounts of human nature. One that's in accordance with God's creational design, and one that discards it, ignores it. The second and this is the closing thought, is that as important as all of these ideas are, and look, I have a PhD, I write books, I do political philosophy, as important as all that stuff is, it's not the most important thing for any of us in the work that we're doing to kind of build up a culture of life and a marriage culture and a culture that does honor God. The most important thing, and this is the lesson from Benedict, is our witness. If you're familiar at all with Benedict, he's a world-class intellectual. He was a theologian, professor of theology. He debated all of the leading intellectuals in Europe, all these like leading German secularist philosophers. Benedict has debated them. And there's a quote that's always stuck with me from him where he says, "It's not the arguments of the philosophers and theologians that win converts. It's the lives of the saints. It's the beauty of holiness." Right? What actually is attractive to other people isn't kind of like, what's the witty book chapter that we can give them. It's what is our embodied witness? How are we living out the truth when it comes to marriage, when it comes to religious liberty, when it comes to life? What are we doing to welcome the stranger to our table? What are we doing to help out women facing unplanned pregnancies? What are we doing to help out the couples who are going through a rough patch in their marriage? How are we in our own families living out the beauty of the gospel on these issues, precisely to be that witness to our neighbors that say, what is it about that family across the street? They have all the same struggles and troubles that we have, but they seem to have a certain joy about it. Right? There's something that's attractive about their family life. And to my mind, this is something to me that is actually hopeful, because this is entirely within our power, right? Regardless of what happens at the State House, regardless of what happens in DC, each and every one of us can decide what we do with our families, what we do with our relationships, what we do with our decisions. A famous French writer once said, "The only tragedy in life is not to have been a saint." Right? It's within our power to cooperate with God's grace to fulfill our vocation in life. And so with that, I just want to thank John for doing that in his own life. Right? What's going on with North Carolina Family Policy Council, what's going on with their work at the State House, with their work across the state, is precisely fulfilling their vocation, doing their work. You saw it in the video, where at one point one of the members of the State House says, look, we weren't even talking about policy at this point, we were just catching up about our families, and then we started praying about our families, right? That's the type of witness that I think will be our best long-term defense and promotion of the family. Thank you.